why don't you start off, give a quick introduction, Chris?
Yes, my name's Chris McLaughlin. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Johns Manville. We make glass products in primarily in the U.S. and Europe. And I've been with my company for about 30 years.
Wow. Okay. So that's why you have such good insights. Adnan, why don't you introduce yourself next, please?
Good afternoon. My name is Adnan Ahmed. I'm working with Ornua as head of IT and CISO. Ornua is a dairy. We are part of dairy industry. We are a dairy cooperative headquartered in Dublin, Ireland. I'm based in Ireland, and we are the largest exporter of dairy products out from Ireland as well. I've been working with Ornua for almost 8 years.
Thank you very much. And Tamas, last but not least.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. My name is Tamas. I'm a senior OT security expert. I'm working for my own company, which we are providing industrial cybersecurity services on professional level. I'm working in OT I'm working in the security more than 20 years. From IT security, so from OT security is around 12, 13 years. I spent a lot of years on the Middle East. First as Schneider Electric engineer, later on senior security engineer of Honeywell. I was met with Sinclair, and I'm very happy from it. I learned from him a lot in the past. And we are providing OT cybersecurity services for very big enterprise companies, since from architecture up to the real supporting the board of really big companies, oil and gas, manufacturing a lot, also for chemical industry.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So let's dive in and try and get through as many of these questions as we can. As I mentioned, if anybody has any questions, just hit that Q&A button and we'll get to them as soon as possible. So let's jump in. How do you communicate risk to non-cyber leaders in a way that drives investment and urgency? So that's a big question. Chris, why don't you jump in and take that one?
Yeah, and I think if you're talking to like senior executives, I think one of the things about cyber is I think there's enough awareness that these things happen. Cyber events occur. A couple of ways to focus on it. One is I think if you tell stories about here's what happened to this company, here are the events that caused it, and here are like the investments that we could make to avoid these kinds of situations. And in the OT space, I think it's really about you bring in the element of safety, and you might talk through a scenario. So if this were to happen to this production line or to this business process, I think they understand the impacts. They just need to understand kind of what could happen. And again, I think if you bring it back to real scenarios and real examples in the industry, and I think most executives now, manufacturing is certainly one of the top targets for ransomware. They have peers that have gone through this kind of thing.
Right, and I always find it valuable to bring it back to the value at risk to the organization. And that's something that I think from the board down to the control room, people can understand if they understand how the company creates value, makes money, provides that value to their customers, etc. if they can align even in their sort of small environment with their blinders on, then they can align that with their own role, and it helps them also communicate that to peers.
Yep.
Adnan, do you have anything to add on that side from your perspective?
I completely agree with Chris, and also obviously yourself as well. I think one of the tactics that we use that work well for us is a risk to value heat map. You need to talk to business in their own language. If you start talking about jargons, when OT security, SCADA is not working, or PLC issues, you lose attention. So for example, rather than saying instead of we have unpatched vulnerabilities in our OT systems, you already lost them halfway. Why not you would say, if a ransomware attack on this particular factory or plant could halt production for 5 days, costing you 8 million, and breach of SLA and everything, they get it. They understand by not patching a particular production line, it could cost you this much money, and then your production is down for those number of days. You're talking and explain to them in their own language. So storytelling is very important. If you give examples of recent breaches happening, how this have impact. As you know, in UK, there are 3 major breaches happen in retail sectors, and then shelves are empty. We are part of food sector as well. If I explain to the exec and the board that if touch wood, if we are one of those, you won't see Kerrygold butter on the shelf, how would you feel about it? So it's easier to explain to them about aligning the business risk with the so cyber risk with the business priorities. For us as a leaders, we need to make sure that we are the business enabler rather than just a cost center. And how we make sure that the business understand, get the message from us as the security leader that what they need to do to make sure our plant and our machineries are safe.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. So I think the key thing also that we see is the sort of moving away from the CISO and the cybersecurity team as the team of no, you can't do that, or unplug that, or stop doing that, to understanding that particularly in manufacturing companies, it's all about innovation. It's all about doing. But our role is to help them do that securely and safely in terms of cyber. It's not about stopping the movement forward or the next innovation, but and that often requires being in there when they're planning, right, on the ground before it actually gets rolled out. I think the biggest challenge is when they come to you after they've decided to do something, and then you have to try and patch security onto that. So I think it's becoming, I think it was mentioned a few times, about immersing this concept of cyber and cyber safety into the DNA and culture, and then having them include yourselves in the project as it gets off the ground. So you don't have to be concerned about running around trying to pull cables out and stop things from happening after. Okay, so why don't we take a zoom out? We haven't really talked too much about geopolitical risk, but in particular, I think in Europe, it's quite a relevant topic, and also third-party risks. So I guess, how do you expect, keeping one eye on the political situation, another eye on the third party and supply chain in the near future, not talking about down the road, but how are you adjusting your planning to I guess keep one eye on that and one eye on that and anything else? Tamas, why don't you lead into this one?
Yes, we can. So from the geopolitical and third-party risk, I think the most important things, which it became much more on a higher level, it's attacks for the supply chain directly. Due to this escalating the tension, it's a war in the Europe. We can say that is very sad, but is. It's becoming much more focusing on the targets and attacks for the critical infrastructure. A lot of cases in Eastern Europe, the critical infrastructure just in a situation of securing level. So it can make and a very big target. I can say an example. The Catastrophe portal in Slovakia is just one example, where it was attacked and by ransomware, and it was not functional more than near 1 month. And this portal attack showed all the loans. If you need to buy, the banks are using it, the people are using it, so it's a part of the critical infrastructure. Another case, a lot of examples are around the attacks of different kind of critical infrastructure, which is very important. The supply chain, like we can say that much more focus on targeted email attacks or phishing emails for the big companies CEOs. Also very big, very important to learn these people or somehow filter these people to protect them. The third parties is also much more attack, because if it's the very big, the big enterprise company are implementing lot of solutions for the cybersecurity perspective, there are also every industrial environment has smaller, mid, and bigger vendors. And the third party is provided. So this kind of attack types provided for the also place for industrial zero trust to connect these third parties in case of required places, it required to any kind of maintenance or any kind of support to reduce this risk of third parties. Because a lot of attack types can be heard that the bigger companies were attacked by the third-party implant. Typical situation, VPN trusting for the third-party companies, and you know very well, and now we know it from the standard as well, that the VPN solutions are not safe anymore. So also the standardization is going through that to eliminate this risk of these problems. Of course, it always take time, always need more implementation, always adding attack vectors, what need to be elaborated. But it's very important that the companies must take care of these problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. We often talk about maturity in our environment as well. But when you work, particularly for a larger manufacturer, I guess, and critical infrastructure as well, as you mentioned, that your company can go and then acquire another company. So your maturity code, it's like the snakes and ladders that that was mentioned very early on. I think that it's called shoots and ladders. Is that right, Chris? But so you're here, and then suddenly you're back in the start. And I think we know that every plant can have a different level of maturity, and depending on where you are and the type of geopolitical threats as well can be different. So it makes it even more complex. And Chris, you having sort of like one leg in the US market and one leg in Europe, how are you looking at the third party and the geopolitical risk? And I mean, everything seems to be upside down every day and going backwards and forwards. How do you sort of incorporate that and adjust that as you go? What does that look like?
Yeah, and you know, you know, to Thomas's point, one of the things I've seen, I saw a good graphic of, you know, I believe it was the Ukraine kind of, you know, stepping through what happened and timeline, and you'll see cyber and then kinetic and then cyber and kinetic. And so there's obviously cyber's becoming another mechanism in the tool set for disruption. You know, so you always understand that any kind of war, honestly, is going to have some cyber elements, and sometimes it'll have things that are probably meant more as collateral damage or disruption. And so you've always got to consider that. global companies have to consider a lot of that because they're generally in the middle of those or in different areas. Third party is very interesting as well. I think, we are seeing just a lot of third-party suppliers. We're even seeing customers having cyber events, and they could be purely from a business perspective. There may not be any IT communication going on with a supplier, but they provide raw materials, and so you have to understand the risk of that single source supplier impacting your business. In maintenance providers, there was someone asked, I saw a question on kind of the maintenance providers. I do think that's a avenue that is concerning. There have been certainly some notable cases where a maintenance provider or an integrator has gotten compromised and has then tried to get into the network of again, part of it is I think of it as it's not always who you are, but who you know. And so, they may be an entry point into systems. If we look at like larger environments, they have a lot of security controls around their computers, around their assets. A small maintenance firm may not have those things. And so when they connect to your network, you really need to make sure you're looking at controls to make sure you're securing them. So that certainly is something I think you've got to take very seriously. They are much more likely to be attacked because they're easy targets, honestly, and use that attack as a supply chain attack into your environment.
Yeah, I think all good points. It's getting more complex and scarier, and it's like you need to keep one eye here, one eye there, and eyes all over the place.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of both. I guess the first step is really to understand the risk and then decide whether or how to manage it. That's really I think in a lot of cases one of the biggest challenges. And as we kind of touched on a number of times today, that it's not just a technical issue, it's also a people and process, but very much a people issue. It seems that often people are the most complex out of all the systems and processes that we have. So I guess I'll throw this one to you, Adnan. What's the one actionable tactic that you can share with participants that really helps you build this alignment between the IT, the OT, the engineering, other teams, and or the stakeholders as well, to focus on the people complexity, if you like.
In my opinion, one actionable tactic or alignment that you should look into, and that proved highly effective for us, is cross-functional cybersecurity governance team, where you have cybersecurity expert from IT side and also operations directors, engineering team. So it's a combination of IT and OT. They work together to build the cohesion that's required. And if it's not just in my opinion, it's not just like a steering committee that are making decisions. In my opinion, it's a working group with shared responsibility. For example, in our case, IT is responsible for implementing security tools and protocols for OT, but IT is not responsible or owning the assets. So assets owner are operations. IT is implementing protections and remediations plan and mitigation plan for those things. We meet regularly to make sure our priorities and risk are aligned, especially around the availability and resilience is top #1 priorities for OT. IT, we look into confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So how do we align them together? So making sure that our priorities are aligned together. We share the same language talking about the same language. If IT is talking in IT language and not understanding the OT language, it cause more problems. So one of the things we are doing is making sure IT guys go into OT site, plant, and understanding the factories, understanding the risks that we are seeing it, understanding how difficult it is to patch SCADA machines. Because if you're sitting here in a head office and trying to instruct OT guys, here is a SCADA machine you need to patch, it's not going to work because we are not on the ground. So one of the things we are changing our tactic is to make sure IT and OT talking about the same language, joint workshop between IT and OT, the threat modeling and risk has to be shared rather than we try to do everything on our own. So start small, working with IT and OT, and start winning the hearts of the operations, because one of the biggest risks I've seen in IT/OT joint ownership is sometimes OT thinks that operations guys think that IT don't understand OT. To some extent, that's right. Like we will never be able to understand how PLC works. We don't really need to understand, but we need to understand what kind of vulnerabilities a PLC may contain or HMIs, and how do we patch it and how we should not be patching it. So it's a joint effort, shared responsibility. And then once we start winning the hearts with the asset visibility tool and network segmentation, go in phases. Once you start seeing the improvements, that you build trust, and then the amount of things that you think you never thought about will be coming from operations, they will come back to you and start asking, can we do this? Can we do that? But start always with small, making sure that you have a shared responsibility, shared ownership, shared risk, and then you go from there rather than trying to dictate, okay, here is I'm a Mr. CISO, here is I want you to do A, B, and C. You'll never go far from that perspective.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you've been there, you've been around for a while there. So what was the hardest thing about all that to get started? When if you go back to the beginning, what was the most difficult sort of first step there?
The most difficult thing which I have noticed is, as long as operations in general in the industry thinks that it's IT problem if there is a breach. So how do you convince an operations that a breach could take your whole production down? Because always think as an IT, you see ransomware, blue screen, everything. So to convince them an IT issue could cause production downtime. So a breach could start from IT towards OT or vice versa as well. So explaining to them why it could impact your health and safety as well. A change in a calibration of a PLC could have a catastrophic impact from health and safety. In our case, food reliability, whether we can trust that food that we are shipping to our customers. So initially is to get the buy-in, making sure they understand. One of the common questions are normally asked at the exact level is, if there is a breach, who are they going to call? And the answer is they're going to call CISO, saying, but you're calling CISO, but not giving CISO an opportunity to work with operations to make sure they're working hand in hand. And now once you have that cohesion, it works really well. The execs understand, board understand, operations understand, and you have a clear demarcation of what is the role of operations. They are the asset owners. We can't apply any patches, anything on their environments without their getting approval, but they are not the ones who are going to apply those things. The directions will come from IT, explaining what needs to be done on operations side. Is the operations guys who will agree with you that, okay, yes, you could do this, we can't do this. Initially, it's difficult, but once you get going, it makes life easier because you need to build trust. Initially, operations think IT will come and break my production. And they are right as well. So you have to go in phases, make sure that you do small steps, asset visibility without any breaking anything, and then keep going afterwards.
And Chris, is that your experience as well? I mean, also going way back to the beginning, is that how the initial discussions came up? Or
Yeah, I think for me, building that gap, I kind of had a unique challenge because I've been with JM for 30 years. About 15 years ago, we said we got a problem between IT and engineering, and I was the biggest part of the problem, because I was on the IT side, and I think one of the first things I had to make the realization that I don't know OT, and they're, engineers are very smart, so are IT, but we just don't understand each other sometimes. And so what I did, you know, and I'd been in plants for years. One of the things I did was I brought in a specialist that was an engineer. I mean, so he was a controls engineer, and I needed an interpreter to really understand what's on their mind, what's, you know, and then we started to have the dialogue. And then after that, we became the small team became in demand to help them with some of the issues that they were having as far as network, because that, you know, in a lot of organizations, I think the OT side is just kind of, there's this firewall between corporate and IT, or corporate and OT, and the OT guys do their thing. But when you look at holistic risk, you really need to understand that whole chain. And so, you know, that team started to really get invited to every meeting, and then it became very natural. So, you know, in a lot of cases, that whole team of mine is recruited from engineers or people that have been in the plant, and, you know, the plant accepts them. And, you know, I think that's a key thing, is you really have to be able to, both sides acknowledge that there's gaps in your understanding. And the more that you admit that and say, okay, what can you, engineer, contribute to me, and what can you, IT person, contribute, and then you're going to work together much better. And once I broke that chain, you know, and broke that, I felt like then everything was possible.
It sounds like the next hire is like a marriage counselor or
Yeah,
a
I've said I'm not
psychologist
sure
on
who's
the
from
team.
Venus and who's from Mars, but I'm sure engineers have a preference, but
Definitely. Tamas, did you want to add something?
Yes, just I would like to add one sentence regarding this. We had in the past. I had this situation in the past. So just imagine that the IT, a little bit bigger team, IT and the OT, they don't want to communicate. Anyhow, it was a nightmare to even push through any kind of project because of any kind of blockage. The discussion with the board and the top management was that we changed the roles. So we took one leader from the IT. We put, of course, with expertise and with help. We put the IT manager, one of the managers, to the OT environment, and the OT environment engineer to the IT environment. Okay, it's a longer, I understand. It's not possible if you have only one person for everything, which is also not supported, but okay. And it started to work. And after what Chris mentioned, it was like someone's here, someone's there. After, when these people started to find the language, it was possible to push through much quicker, much easier. Because they understood not the technical, there was any problem with the technical things. They understood how it should be go through, what are the connections, of course, and the differences as well. And it helped a lot.
Right.
It helped a
Yeah,
lot.
I think we're hearing that from everywhere, that it's really the trust, the relationship first, and that's what is the I think the work along when you get to having the actual discussion on technology and processes. So brilliant. I guess Tamas, while you're still focused on this, what would you suggest? Again, let's take a step back now, a different direction, and look at everyone here is part of this sort of wider industrial cybersecurity community. And I think that's an interesting topic to just segue on to the community. So you along with Chris and Adnan, have many years experience. What's if there's one thing that you could make happen, or you would like to see at the community level in the next 6 months or 12 months to help shift things forward or expand the circle, what would that be?
So for me, it's a little bit, I'm going to a little bit of higher from the community perspective. I'm commenting in the larger scale. I think what is a little bit missing is the industry-wide threat intelligence sharing, the coordinated response mechanism. The unified platforms, which is allowing the manufacturers to exchange the detailed threat information, would significantly enhance the industry-wide capabilities. The creating of centralized cross-sector threat intelligence, which is, I would like to explain that what actually existing, and what should be like in the future. Actually existing like sector-specific information sharing and analysis centers like ISACs, water ISACs, energy ISACs, manufacturing ISACs, like auto ISA already facilitated threat intelligence systems, sharing between industrial stakeholders. These communities like tactics, techniques, and procedures itself, or participants for the regional restricted paying attention of the members for critical infrastructure. Also existing government-driven platforms like USACIAS, Mitra Attack, Stix, Taxi, also private initiatives with different vendors. Don't want to mention exactly the names. We didn't discuss forward, but it's exiting the manufacturing, existing for the private companies who has the threat intelligence. But what is exactly missing is the lack of unified globalized ICS threat exchange, I think. It's my personal. There is no centralized vendor agnostic cross-border cross-sector platform focused purely on OT ICS cyber threats in real time or bidirectional exchange of this communication. Existing ISACs or other are fragmented and
Are you
sometimes
familiar with
overlapping.
the manufacturing ISAC or the OT ISAC? I know there's some initiatives that are starting.
Yes, there are some initiatives. So not so. Let's say if the manufacturing ISACs are in that case, it could be. This is a little bit missing from this perspective. Low participation from the SME and tier 2, 3 suppliers. Many smaller manufacturers, industrial players don't participate in threat sharing due to the resource problems or legal concerns. So the most important, who is in touch, they cannot share because of the capacity, because of the legal things. They are very limited with this. Limited automation in sharing and response. Or there are not directly OT-specific detection systems and response systems. Maybe it has also cultural and legal barriers, but it depends on how to. Many companies are reluctant and share. They don't want to share that they have a problem. Of course, it can be anonymously, but it's still. What needs to happen in this area, I think, establish a global vendor neutral, which is very important. And I don't want to make any negative for the vendors. Absolutely not. Neutral threat intelligence exchange is very important just to focusing on the manufacturer itself. Mandate or incentives participation, especially for suppliers and in a critical infrastructure in case. I think enabling just one idea, enabling the anonymized automated sharing of these problems, what incidents, what is happening. This is like, I think quickly, these are my ideas, what are always figuring out, and if we need to provide for the customer, even from the customer side or from the vendor side, this is what we a little bit missing.
What's your take on that, Adnan? Do you see another area, or is this a big concern, or do you see another area of interest for the community or for the industry as a whole?
To me, it's a big concern. I completely agree with Tamas. That's one of the aspects of the threat intelligence sharing. But at the moment, what I'm seeing that even the asset integrators and asset owners are not sharing insights that they're gaining among themselves. So for example, if the big OEM vendors, they're getting a lot of insight. How they're getting it is because they have their applications, their systems are deployed to millions of different locations. They're already getting those insights. I've seen that example. I would prefer to even mention the name Honeywell in US. I attended one of the sessions and they were talking about how they are collecting that information. So I've seen some other OEM vendors globally are looking into that and providing a proactive approach, going back to their own companies and saying, here we are seeing your devices are already exposed to internet. So I would encourage and recommend all the OEM big giant companies saying, why not they're all doing a joint effort, sharing the information and start collaborating each other, and also with your companies and saying, if we are using Siemens PLCs, and if some of the devices are exposed, they already have that information. I've seen Schneider Electric doing it really well, whereby they contact their companies if they're seeing anything happening. But I would encourage Siemens, ABB, all of those big giant companies to do it. So it's wider. Manufacturing ISAC is there, but it's not as mature as IT. To be honest with you, it's starting. I would say it's the right step in the right direction, but it's going to take time. And also joint collaboration among companies in manufacturing and the companies who are using in OT. There are initiatives I'm seeing. I'm a member of European Cybersecurity Organization. We have a subcommittee for OT specifically. We talk about intelligence sharing, type of problems we are seeing it. I'm seeing another angle around remote access. Remote access is a big problem in OT. Why not these companies, when they are using it, they are gathering a lot of intelligence. Why not they share back to the community anonymously? I'm not looking for sensitive because this area is highly sensitive. I'm not expecting if companies breach, they are going to mention the names and saying here is what happened. But why can't they start sharing this information anonymously for the for the community? For example, there are recently in UK 3 breaches on retailers. There are a lot of things common. The hackers group is the same, but can we not get the intelligence anonymously? Here is 1, 2, 3 things happening. Why it's important for us? Then we can apply the same thing. We are all in this together. So if you start keeping the secret information in our own pocket, we are not going too far. Hackers are communicating each other. They are collaborating. Why can't we communicate as the asset owners, asset integrator, and also the companies who are using these products?
Yeah, I think it's a very valid point, and I agree on the manufacturing ISAC side. It's sort of just getting off the ground now, and not. I think it's safe to say also not all ISACs are created equal.
Yes.
Or not all ISACs are as transparent as they probably should be, and maybe there's a little bit of hesitation there about sharing details as well. But I think it's a really good point. And it's interesting that I think at Schneider Electric, you look at the sort of the CVEs that I've seen this mapped out by Dan Ritchie, who sort of does some of that, and you see Schneider. I think it's Schneider that's by far the most sort of vulnerabilities that are disclosed.
Yes.
But it's the fact that they're disclosing them where other people are probably not disclosing them. So they always come out number one by far. And then everybody points to them saying, hey, look how many vulnerabilities they have. But they're actually the one disclosing the vulnerabilities. So I think there's a certain stigma still attached to that. We have like 3 minutes left. And Chris, I want to throw you a really quick question, which actually came up in the Q&A as well. And I think it's really critical because some of the manufacturers on the call today are not necessarily the biggest in the world. So it's how do small manufacturers prioritize cybersecurity with the limited resources and skills, etc. And in particular in Europe with all of the NIS2 and the CRA and all of these other things. So really, as quick as you can do you want to just grab that one?
Yeah, I'd say, at a start, you might want to, even if you pull in an expert to kind of help you a little bit, but what you want to do is make sure that you have secured your industrial kind of environment from your corporate environment. I mean, a lot of the ransomware things we've seen have been spillover where things were not, isolated. So you want to establish that. Look at remote access. So how are companies getting in there? Certainly, there's third party, there are solutions that have been hacked, I guess, and so you want to make sure that you've got those secure. And then I think there's some basic process areas that you can always look at process, even if you can't invest in the technology, good basic cyber hygiene as far as make sure not everybody has administrator access to everything. There are some best practices that small companies and large companies both can do, and they don't cost money. It's just discipline around making sure that you take cyber seriously. Those would be the biggest ones. I mean, I think there are a lot of areas. We do ISO 27001, which helps us with NIST too, because then we could say,
Correct.
here's what we're doing for this. Here's our controls for policies and awareness and those kinds of things that may be in some of the other regulations.
Yeah, and I think Yusuf jumped on in the chat as well, and I think said very similar things to you. I think about getting the basics right is going to be, and if it's 80% or 90% or 70%, but it's a big step that smaller companies can do as well. They focus on also understanding what's at risk to their companies. So the risk might be smaller if it's a small company, but it may not look smaller to them, right? If their companies are on the line. So we've come to the end. Really appreciate everyone's input. Fantastic panel. Thank you for joining us.